did we choose our ancestral wounds before we even came here?
Yes. If we want to have a specific life experience, we can only do that by opting into specific family lines, into specific family patterns. By coming into a family line, which all of us did to get here, you are actually participating in ancestral healing without even knowing it. When it comes to ancestral healing, it's like the more you know, the better. I'm not saying that everything you find out is fun. Some of it is so painful. It's like everything they're describing, it starts to just be like, it's like your whole body is reacting as if you are there because you were. So why I need people to be able to hold this dichotomy is I don't want people to take the awareness that they chose this and use that to negate all of the pain. It requires a high degree of bravery. It also requires the understanding that if we want to get out of pain, the only way out is in, really. One of the fundamental elements of my career in trauma work is that you must re-experience traumas in order to find bring resolve to those traumas.
How we can go through that, at least on a very basic level, to where we heal things rather than re-traumatize them.
I created this thing called the completion process, which is a process that is designed specifically for...
Are you ready to shine? Shine bright.
Woohoo!
Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I'm Michael Sandler, your host on Inspire Nation. If you've ever wanted to let go of ancestral wounds or wounds from before you were born, then do we have the Ancestral Healing Teal Swan show for you. Today, I'll be talking with the best-selling author and speaker, Teal Swan, about ancestral wounds, how they're gifts, and how you can begin healing from them today. So welcome to the show, Teal. Are you ready to shine?
Yes, I am.
Woohoo! All right, before we dive right into things, and I hate to use this as the first question, but I think it's important. Would you say humanity is a walking, talking ancestral wound right now?
Yes, it is. It is absolutely that.
And what does that mean? Because to me, I see us as living out the wounds of the past and repeating the past because we haven't leaned into or felt through or dove into the past.
Yeah, most of what society has done is to just create adaptations to traumas which have been experienced on a collective level, right? The thing is, when we adapt to some kind of a distressing situation, the adaptations that we make tend to bring about the same type of distressing situations. This is something that I spend a lot of time teaching individuals, right? And we need to start to recognize that the patterns that we see in an individual when they encounter trauma and their adaptive strategies are mirrored actually in this macrocosmic level where you've got societies that are going through a trauma, and then those societies are adapting in ways that bring about the very thing that they're trying to essentially get away from.
This is perfect, and I'm gonna go to a little bit of a sports analogy here. Okay. So I have twin titanium femurs, twin titanium hips. I'm like a dowsing rod flipped upside down, and I run like the wind, swim like the wind. I do great. However, my right leg is twisted out. Why is it twisted out? Because I had an accident 10 years ago that I adapted to heal, but never actually dealt with the trauma. And now it's coming back as I'm trying to play at that elite level again and go, ha, ha, ha. You haven't dealt with it. You are going to deal with me.
Exactly. And if we don't deal with a lot of these traumas that are playing out on a real sort of global societal level, what happens is these traumas repeat, which is what, of course, people in my position are the most afraid of and are the most interested in preventing.
So, and that's why I look at, do I dare go there? Forgive me, everybody. I'm going to go there. So, and I'll throw both my Jewish card up here and the fact that I had the most amazing Palestinian EA for years. I'm going to throw that into the mix. When I look at the Middle East, what I see is not only wounds that haven't healed from there, but wounds that are perpetuating again because they haven't healed from World War II back in Germany. And because things weren't dealt with there, they're coming back up. Good people, great people on both sides, but the wounds were never dealt with.
Yep.
And so the question becomes, well, actually, let's back up. You use a beautiful term. What is an expansion path?
An expansion path is like a path of evolution.
Yeah.
To expand is to become more better, right? When we're using it in terms of, the self-growth field, things like that. So when we're talking about an expansion path, we're talking about what actions to take, what decisions to make, and therefore what direction to go in that is in alignment with the healing experience or the improvement for a person or a society.
So in that sense, we get to back up here and say, did we choose our ancestral wounds before we even came here?
Yes. Now, I know that when we say this, we have to account for the dichotomy that exists within this universe. I think
Yes.
this is the thing that is the very hardest for people who are on the path of awakening, because you have to be able to expand your own consciousness enough to
Yeah.
hold cognitive dissonance. And that is a very uncomfortable state. So when we're talking about these ancestral wounds, we have to hold, in the one hand, the fact that most people do not remember consciously electing, these types of patterns within their life, consciously choosing into a family line. And yet, at this higher level, that is absolutely the process that took place. So why I need people to be able to hold this dichotomy is I don't want people to take the awareness that they chose this and use that to negate all of the pain that they have been experiencing.
Spiritual crowd tends to be more sensitive. This is a good thing. We're the forerunners. We're the ones with the light that we shine away for everyone. But it also means that we tend to beat ourselves up the most. And so we could say, hey, you're saying I chose this family, I chose these wounds, I chose this abuse. I must be, and then they take it to a completely non-logical conclusion. I must be a bad person. What's wrong with me?
I feel like a lot of that is eradicated by understanding the reason why we might have chosen something.
Tell me more.
To understand the why behind having chosen into a specific family line, we have to very accurately identify the positive patterns and the negative patterns that have taken place within that family line. Because we start to see the medicine that we have for those negative experiences, and also we could say the upside of the downsides of those family patterns, at the same time as we can see the very positive traits that came through a family line, which are serving our own desire path. So I've got an example. Let's say that you've
Yeah.
got somebody who's looking into their ancestry, and let's say that they've chosen a career as a counselor or something.
Yeah.
They might, by looking into their, family of origin, they might recognize, wait a minute, I came into a family where there was no emotional needs being met. It was like entirely emotional neglect. Now I can see how basically I've come in as the pattern changer for that. And by doing so, have essentially healed this family line. I have created a different expansion path for this family line, which is going to affect every single element of progeny that comes from this family line, right?
Yeah.
Or you might go another way. That same person might look in their family line and recognize, I come from a long line of people who exhibit such a curiosity towards human behavior. It makes perfect sense why I would have come into a family line that held a consciousness stream which already vibrated at that level of awareness of human patterns. So that a lot of this was just second nature. I didn't have to maybe develop it. I just recognized human patterns. Thanks, Grandpa.
It's Native American wisdom. It says a couple of different things. Well, it says so much, but one of the things it says is that the medicine is always about 3 steps outside your door, and that the medicine is found right next to the poison. So if you have poison ivy, if you look right next to it, you're going to actually find the plant that's the antidote. Sounds like that's what you're talking about here.
Yeah, it is. Yes.
And so what we get to do, in a sense, and we're going to talk more about it here, is instead of, we don't need to relive experiences. I don't want anybody to ever do that. But we get to look for what the antidote may be.
What do you mean by you don't want anybody to re-experience things?
Well, it's a great question you ask. I want people to feel the emotions that they haven't felt. I want them to go through it, but I don't want them to relive the experience.
Okay.
And to me, energy is very different than the experience. To lay me down on a couch and tell me about your childhood, I feel at times can actually do a heck of a lot more harm than good.
Really? Huh.
Tell me your opinion. Go for it.
Well, I mean, it's totally separate to talking about ancestral healing. one of the fundamental elements of my career in trauma work is that you must re-experience traumas in order to find
Okay.
resolve, bring resolve to those traumas. But of course, most people don't know how to bring resolve to traumas, and that's where that, open potential for re-traumatization happens.
That's what I'm talking about. So it's off topic, but would you mind sharing? I know we opened a little can of worms, but would be all right sharing how we can go through that, at least on a very basic level, to where we heal things rather than re-traumatize them.
Yeah, so I created this thing called the completion process, which is a
Yeah.
process that is designed specifically for recovery and um, like the processing through of traumas.
Yeah.
What we do is we consciously work with a trigger.
Yeah.
So triggers are alive within us when something has not been resolved, right? So when that trigger arises, you can think of it like this big open wormhole that is inviting us to go in to see what is unresolved and to be engaging with it directly so that we
Yeah.
can bring resolve to it. So what I'm doing with this process is helping people to use the mechanisms of their own being, right?
Mhm.
A trigger being one of those, flashbacks being one of those. It's not like when those things arise, something's going wrong in the body. It's the body's way of saying, help, 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 I need attention.
Yeah.
So we're essentially offering it that conscious attention, but in a way so as to understand exactly what happened, to let go of our resistance emotionally to accepting what happens. That means we have to
Yeah.
deeply feel it and listen to the personal truths and thoughts around what is happening to us at the time. This is
Yeah.
a deep level of self-understanding from that space where you're no longer resisting the reality of what happened. You then bring whatever need was not met in that moment. And that's what starts to play the tape forward of resolve. So it's a very elaborate, let's say, process of meeting the need that came up in the moment but could not be met, right? There was not change. If there's distress, there was not change that could take place to make the situation better. All there was a painful adaptation that had to be made. And so we're essentially reversing this process and also reversing the process of dissociation. Because when most people go through a trauma, they don't actually go through it. They think they did. Really, they've popped off and depersonalized the experience. And so they're actually chronically living in a dissociative state. So this process is designed to reverse the dissociative state so as to take that aspect of them that's stuck in the past and get it to rejoin you in the here and now.
How much is bringing, this is a process. I went through my own process of doing that. I got hit by a car racing in Europe, trying to make it to the Tour de France. And I had PTSD and flashbacks and so much pain that wasn't actually from the getting hit by the car itself, but I was racked in pain because I wasn't leaning into it until I was willing, I call it snow globing, until I was willing to look at it from all angles. There's a little shark in here smiling. I realized the shark is smiling, but I had to bring so much love to myself to go through this.
Right.
How do we do that, particularly at a time where we may not feel love to ourselves? How do we do that? Because what you're describing is the hero's journey. This ain't an easy path.
No, it's not an easy path. It requires a high degree of bravery. It also requires the understanding that if we want to get out of pain, the only way out is in, really. But I think that's something that's really beneficial that a lot of people don't think a lot about is that oftentimes when we go through something really painful, what's the most painful about the circumstance is not what happened, is that we were alone with the pain of what happened and in it. And so if we can get other people to be enrolled in our process and to be a part of our process, we can go through pain with someone. And that changes everything. I
Mm.
mean, it changes the whole landscape. So that's one reason why, even with the process that I'm describing, I've been training professionals around the world to be able to do this with people so that they don't have to go into it by themselves.
I don't need you to share about your childhood again. I said I don't need to put you on the couch and say, "Tell me about your childhood." What was your process of healing, and did you have, or how did you get started in that process? Because clearly that was like light bulb, you know, about a Mr. Despicable. Here's my life path. But how did you choose the brave road, and did you have others to help you?
In the beginning, I only had animals, not people. Then it was like
Can you
the
tell me
universe.
more?
Tell me more about that.
Yeah, yeah. I've had coyote, I've had rooster, I've had some very special animals in my life.
Oh, good. Yeah, so in my life, I was raised in my childhood in the middle of the wilderness with very emotionally unavailable people and abusers, basically. outside of that, and in a culture that did not accept my family at all because it was predominantly religious culture. One religion, anyone who's not that religion is a problem. So I was so isolated. I mean, so isolated in my childhood. It was, I just don't even know how I lived through it, honestly. Um, the only real playmates that I had were animals. And it's them that really taught me how to love. You know, it was horses and dogs primarily. And there were other barnyard animals also, but I mean, horses did more for me than any other species did.
I've had
Um,
horses. They are so intuitive. They are
oh yeah,
so in touch.
totally. So they taught me how to love people, and I really feel like if it wasn't for them, I would have turned into a complete psychopathic nightmare. There would have been no other way for me to get out of pain than to, I think, become what had harmed me. So they kept my heart open, basically. And then when I was 19, I was lucky enough for this fortuitous circumstance to come across where the universe put this one specific man across my
Yeah.
path. And he was just this wonderful, lighthearted, open, supportive person. And one of the first people I'd ever met that was truly worthy of trust.
Yeah.
And it was through him and the way that he was so kind with me that I really started developing an empathy for people. Like I had empathy for people because I had empathy for, all beings. Empathy is not something which I ever lacked, but
Yeah.
I was like a whole other dimension. There was a very conscious element to it. It wasn't just, oh gosh, I'm hurting when you're hurting. It was, I really want the people around me to feel good. Let's take an active role in that rather than just being all about me and my needs, right? Yeah. So how does that tie into the question that you were asking me?
And thank
Uh,
you for diving deep today.
so the question that you asked me was, word it
How
again.
did you how did you begin to heal, and did you do it at first on your own, or
Okay.
did you? Yeah.
So when you get out of the type of childhood that I got out of, which is it's a life experience most people will never have to deal with. I mean, very severe levels of abuse to the point where your brain is shaped differently. They're telling you that, the experts are basically telling you things are never going to change for you. You're going to have to live like this. Um, it's just like hell. Every day is like hell. Every day is just kind of like making do with the best that you've got and looking around at the world and feeling like everybody's got it better. And just it doesn't work when you're in the world trying to function to not have to try to find some way to heal. So a lot of that was forced on
Mhm.
me, trying to navigate how to think differently about people, trying to navigate the world with very few skills, like a lot of missing social skills. It was painful as hell. And then I got thrown into therapy by a man that I ended up dating. It's kind of funny because I'm like resisting it at this point and just
Yeah.
went totally into sports. That's a whole other topic because I feel like sports did a lot of healing for me, like a lot.
Yeah.
And sports puts you in this position where you're like, oh, well, you know what, Teal? I know you really want to win, but you're only going to be able to win if you get rid of this pattern. So
Mhm.
sports puts you squarely up against a mirror where it's like the only difference between you and the person in first place is this pattern. Are you going to deal with it? So yeah, I started having to, I mean, there's no way
Yes.
that you can get to the top physically and just physically. It's not a thing. I mean, you get to this echelon where it's like everybody is at the peak level of fitness. It is not the physical features that differentiate with this person versus this person. It is definitely the contents of their internal world. So you can't be an athlete without working on the contents of your internal world. So obviously sports brought me towards healing in that way, but still sports was a way of me being like, let's not go there. Let's not go there. We're living a different life. And this man got so sick of what it was like to be in a relationship with me because of the adaptations, right, that I had made to, an abusive environment that he just like threw me through the doors of a rape crisis center one day and was like, she needs to be here. She needs to be here. Of course, they're like, it was a crisis, because they're like, we're watching domestic abuse in real time. But when they sat me down in the room and they're like, why do you think that he thinks you need to be here? And I started talking about some of the stuff that had been going on with me as a child. And I remember the director's face turning ash white. And she was like, what you are describing is way above and beyond what we can deal with here. But I know somebody who specializes in this kind of ritual abuse, where I got sort of passed off to that person. And that was like the whole Pandora's box pops open, and I've got to find a way to really put my energy into this, and then running into plateaus there because even those professionals couldn't answer some of these questions. So then you have to figure it out yourself. There's no other option.
See, and I love that you're bringing up the athletic side because the term no option and elite athlete does not go hand in hand. You're a tinkerer, you're a creator. I wrote a paper in English class. My English teacher hated me in high school, where I said that the most creative process is my sport. And he's saying that's not creative at all. It is. You are going to find it over, above, under, around. There is going to be a way.
I love sports. You should just not even get me started. I feel like I have a whole separate personality set for sports. I love it.
Well, to me, it goes hand in hand, and we don't have to go there today. We certainly don't have to go there today. But I will go on my run and train afterwards, and I cannot separate one from the other. You say, Michael, how are you going to teach? How are you going to write? I'm going to go play in the woods. I'm going to go do my dance in the water. I'm going to go swim with the dolphins. I'm going to do my sport, which actually allow me to be a better human being and a better energetic being having a human experience.
You're like preaching to the choir. This is like my thing. I love sports.
So, and I do wish more people would use their physicality because it moves energy. And what we're talking about is that alchemy here. We're transferring, we're changing the energy. First, we have to feel the energy though. And people are numbed up if they don't get moving to what they're actually feeling.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
So let's take it from there. Let's back way up. Okay. What exactly is, I know we're going to go to sports. We're going to come back. We're just going to have fun. What exactly is a family line? Why do you say we choose it? And does a family line make us powerless or in the long run, powerful?
Bring me back to the powerless or powerful question if I don't answer it in what I'm going to say.
Yes.
Before you come into this time-space reality, opting into a physical human incarnation, what you are able to do, because you're not limited by the human brain, is you're able to survey all of these life path potentials. When we come into an incarnation, we begin with an intention for a life. It's the why behind you coming into a specific incarnation. Obviously, the why would be definitely served by this family over this family, right? Mm-hmm. If we want to have a specific life experience, we can only do that by opting into specific family lines, into specific family patterns. So we're looking at all these potentials, and it's complicated enough that we're even looking at the potentials of this sperm with that egg on that month, like crazy, because any tiny variation changes all these life path potentials. So our human brain cannot fathom what it is that you are looking at, right? It is that complex. So looking at all that, you're narrowing it down to this, usually a few families that would offer the same kind of vibrational experiences. They offer similar, let's say, similar benefits. They offer similar traumas that, of course, acts as the fertile soil for expansion. And then you ultimately are choosing into one of them. Oftentimes when women miscarry, it'll be interesting for people who are spiritual to know this. What's happening is that there's been an attempt, and then that essentially that soul stream changes its mind on that particular attempt into that family. So you're looking specifically for this cocktail of positives and negatives, knowing, of course, that every positive comes with a negative, and every negative comes with a positive. Inherent in a lot of these strengths that run through a family line are incredible power and like powers, see, aptitudes, skills, thought patterns that are mastered. I mean, it's already been done, and so you've literally inherited it, right? One of the most common examples of this, and it's very simple for people to understand, is it's so common that even like when somebody's been adopted out of the family, like they have nothing to do with their birth parents, and they're really musical. Maybe they came into a scientific family that has no artistic bone in their body, and yet they're this very musical person. And then they, years later in their 40s, connect back with their birth family, only to find out that they come from 3 generations they can track of musicians. So you're coming into these aptitudes, but you're also coming into these negative patterns. And so those are the weaknesses. So in answer to your question, the fact that you opt into a specific family line is both your weakness and your power. So let's look at a detrimental pattern.
Yes.
Let's say that you come into a family line that experienced extreme levels of famine.
Yeah.
that extreme level of famine may make it so that the adaptations that a whole family has to make is every man for himself. And suddenly the definition of success in that family is, can you make it without support? So all of a sudden there's this pattern change in a family that's quite the opposite of what you would expect. You'd expect that a family gives energy to each other, gives resources to each other, and so forth. But in these types of families where something like a famine changes that patterning, all of a sudden you see parents virtually abandoning the children and almost congratulating them for doing everything completely on their own and making excuses for when children fail to thrive based off of that fact. And so maybe like if you're coming from one of these families, even if the famine was 7 generations ago, you've got this, a terrible pattern of deprivation of needs, not only of your own needs, but needs of other people, because your definition of success is to be able to thrive without it. That's a weakness. Anybody who's like understands what it takes to become the most successful would say support is as integral element of success.
Yeah.
And yet they're going to shortcut themselves because of that. So that's a weakness. So it's like we have to understand that inside of our family lines is the seeds of both.
And what's really fascinating to me, and you talk about this as DNA, not just being a physical thing. You call it a multidimensional. I see it as imprinting all of this information. I don't even think the DNA is almost the receiver to me of this field of information that you're taking in. And maybe you can tell us more about that, because you talk about, downloading the ancestral programs and the ancestral wounds. Even if it didn't take place in this lifetime, you have downloaded it in you.
Yeah. I mean, everything that has happened to anyone in your entire family line is essentially downloaded into your being, but most people do not have the conscious awareness of it. So they're in this very unconscious relationship with those aspects of their ancestral line. And we do have to keep the picture too that like there's been a lot of healing and correcting of patterns throughout the family line that happened thousands of years ago, and you're not even aware of that. What's really active, we got to think in terms of active or not active. What's active within the person, positively or negatively, are the things that are still going, whether it be positive or negative. So yeah, all of these things are within us. It's really about becoming aware of them, tapping into them. And you really can't go wrong, by the way, because it's just, when it comes to ancestral healing, it's like the more you know, the better. Because you could take somebody who's not even interested in this, has never heard of ancestral healing at all. And the reality is that they are doing ancestral healing. By coming into a family line, which all of us did to get here, you are actually participating in ancestral healing without even knowing it.
So I'm blessed that my parents are both alive. And I didn't have the childhood that you did, but my friends, which were very, very few and far in between, wouldn't come over because it was the crazy house. Things were being thrown, words were being screamed. It was crazy house. It describes it fully and completely. So I love my parents very, very much. They're completely and totally insane to this day. They're alive, they're well, they're happy. How important is it that I start, the word interrogation comes to mind, that I start interviewing them on the past, and how do I get through their wall? That I say, well, tell me about your parents or your parents' parents, or tell me about their wounds. And wounds? There were no wounds. I'm like, oh my God, you guys are insane. Where do we go with this? How important is it?
It's super important. And I would go so far as to say it is, I mean, obviously you're not going to be able to force somebody to do something they don't want to do, but it is really a travesty when this information dies with people, and that there tends to be this thing nowadays where people want to be looking to the future instead of to the past. But we've got this saying in circles that are interested in genealogy, which is that which the grandfather wishes to forget, the grandson wishes to remember. And so something that we have to understand when we're embarking on this process is that if that person dies, what they take with them is potentially a lot of information that is inaccessible in other ways. And it's very important to have that information for a lot of reasons. So I would encourage anybody to go in the direction of being as pushy as they can be whilst working people through their resistance. So if I'm being met with resistance when somebody, has the information and I'm really needing it, I will really try to work with what their resistance is, rather than just try to bulldoze through it. What about this scares you? What do you not want to experience? And then I'll enroll them in understanding my reasoning for why it is so important for me, right? Of course, keeping in mind a lot of their values, right? You can weave in people's values with what it is that you're doing, and then they tend to participate um, a lot more easily. Some people are not really willing to look at the fact that they have trauma with their parents, but everybody does, by the way, because trauma is just distress. Every single one of us experience some kind of distress with parents. So usually, rather than using trigger words like trauma, I will walk people into the admitting of trauma by not using words like that. So I'll say something like, look, I so deeply want to understand what it was like for you growing up. So what was it you think that was the most difficult about your relationship with fill in the blank, maybe dad or mom? What was the best? What do you wish that, what did you maybe watch them and say, I'm not going to do this with my kids? What did you watch them and say, well, I'm going to do this with my kids? Like you can kind of walk people into saying it without them having to consciously confront, wait, that caused problems for me, you know?
This is brilliant. I would love it if you can share more. I'm thinking about mom. Mom, are you okay if I say this? When I asked her about her childhood and asked her about trauma, the only thing she would mention is mom flushed my head in the toilet. And I'm like, oh, and I don't even have the right emotion to express how much I can see the ripple effect I would have in her, because what that tells the child, obviously. What are more questions or ways we can delicately do this dance to help our elders to share with us?
You got to figure out first and foremost what it is that they're trying to avoid. So let's pretend that what mom's trying to avoid is seeing mom as a bad person.
Mm-hmm.
So
Thank
that
you.
means that when I'm questioning them for the sake specifically of gaining information about, ancestral stuff, I'm not going to insinuate or even react as if mom is a bad person.
Yeah.
The question is going to be more around, wow, that's interesting. I mean, do you remember why that happened? It's almost like I'm coming with more of a neutral stance. Um, what do you remember what you made that mean as a child? Like I'm just asking questions like that. I'm not adding emotional content. That emotional content is obviously there. They don't realize it. But it's like we have to understand what is our intention? Is our intention to wake mom up to the fact that mom did something totally wrong? Or is our intention, when we've got somebody that doesn't want to see that, to gain as much information as possible? Right?
I'd like to help heal mom, but I'd also like to know so I waited. We had 3 miscarriages. We're so blessed with a child. Uh, I don't think either of us was ready. I was not ready, and until way, how do I put it? I started fatherhood over 50, because I didn't want to gift all of the traumas that I had
Yep.
to to my daughter, of which I'm sure I am still gifting some. One just came up while talking with you. You actually found a trigger for me. And I want to tell everybody, don't judge yourself for finding a trigger. As you would say, it's an Easter egg. This is woohoo. This is the good stuff. And I was going, wait a second. I freak out around food. Food
Okay.
is a trigger for me. Now we can say, well, part of that is becoming because you were an athlete and you had to be as light as you could for blah, blah, blah. And part of that is because my parents, if I did something wrong, if I didn't set the forks quite right on the table, there was no dinner for you tonight, no food for you
Yep.
till tomorrow. But I don't believe that actually started there. And so I'm seeing this trigger as we're talking, and I'm going, how much can I use imagination and leaning into imagination of what may have taken place in past generations to work on healing this?
I mean, I'm not going to cut it off as a potential. I just think it's 10 times more powerful when you can actually research these things. And like what comes
Oh,
up
I'm
for
going to
me,
go for it.
I mean, it's interesting you say that you've got this food trigger because you're like me, knowing you have this Jewish ancestry, knowing that a lot of your Jewish ancestry comes from like some of your like a whole vein of your Jewish ancestry comes from the Russian region. We understand that in
Yes.
that region there was the Pale of Settlement. You want to talk about food insecurity? Go there. Like so even this I'm saying it just keeps going. But it's like the more specific the information, I feel like the better it gets.
So let's say that you have specific information, and then I want to go to a global scale and then bring it back to the individual again. We're kind of doing a pulse, global, individual, because it's important for all of us, I feel. Let's say that you have you have this trigger of food, and you find out from your family, yeah, we were starving on the Russian plateau or something. We were starving way before the Nazis, and it is a miracle our family made it through that time. What do we do with that information?
So you don't need to panic about necessarily going back in time and doing
Mhm.
anything with the ancestry. You realize that it's active within you. So you just
Yeah.
start doing what a person would normally do if they had a food issue. So let's say that I'm noticing that I have a scarcity issue around food.
Yeah.
So I might consciously engage in an experience where there is no scarcity of food. I was working with a woman actually with ancestral trauma, specifically with
Yeah.
this one. And one of the fun experiments that we set up was that she got a potluck together with like 10 of her friends.
Yeah.
And she said these were all of my favorite foods growing up. And so each person was responsible for cooking one of those foods.
Yeah.
And then they brought them over, and instead of like putting them on a table and acting sort of rational, normal, she sat down on the floor, completely surrounded by these big dishes of all of these favorite foods. And of
Abundance.
course, in the moment, like, and it's about, can you resource this? Can you
Mhm.
resource that is no longer the past? Of course, when you know that this is an ancestral trauma thing, it can get very profoundly powerful because you can mentally, and you were talking about imagination, you can invite your ancestors into your body to experience what it is to go from what they, didn't have to experiencing being surrounded by this type of luxurious food. And so you're trying to pull it in. So you're breathing in that feeling of abundance. You're trying to feel the satiation in your body and the calmness of there being no insecurity around there being enough food. And then you're consciously engaging in the, tasting it, but really enjoying it in all of your body. And naturally, it's very rare that when that happens, it just feels amazing. Oftentimes, what happens is you run into that moment where you're like, oh my God, this is so painful. It's almost like the trauma of not having enough
Yeah.
starts flooding out of your being. It's kind of like when somebody goes through some really difficult ordeal and then you put them in a safe space. It's not like, oh, yay. Usually there's this catharsis kind of.
Yeah.
So the catharsis that is happening through us when we are working with an ancestral trauma is a catharsis on a whole other level. It's on a genetic cellular level. So I think it's some of the most profound shifts you will ever experience. And even if somebody wasn't aware that they were working with an ancestral trauma, let's say I'm just working with whatever pattern is up, like with you with food insecurity,
Yeah.
usually what they will report is that like the sheer amount of catharsis and the intensity of the shifts is so colossal, right? So it's larger than other shifts because that pattern has specifically been going for so long. It's very, very big, right? So a big change to a big pattern is a big shift. So you see big things in conjunction with it. So that's just one example of how you might work with the food insecurities, you know?
Thank you. And how do we, what's fascinating to me is, I've known this trigger was there, but I've never actually put I always said it was mainly growing up where food was taken away from me, which is a continuation of an ancestral wound. Hello. But I never made that connection. Maybe the
Yeah.
show is going to do it for people and people are going to make connections. But how do we go super sleuthing to go, wait a second, this didn't start with me? Or even though I'm saying it's in my childhood, it didn't even start then.
So what I would do if I was a person who's starting off on this path,
Yeah.
first I would get into the mentality of being like an investigator.
Yeah.
Really good work with ancestry. It's about being a detective. And a lot of people, when it comes to ancestral stuff, they just want it to be handed to them. They don't want it to be like an Easter egg hunt that can potentially last throughout the totality of their lives,
Yeah.
where it's like they're just going to keep hunting, hunting, hunting. But that is what this process will be like. So understanding that in advance and putting on that cap of like, all right, I'm going to be like an FBI agent and I'm going to hunt for this information. And if that doesn't work, I'm going that way. And if that doesn't work, I'm going that way. Getting into that attitude will make this process a lot easier. So knowing that I've got that and I'm always hunting for more information, a good place to start is by recognizing some of the patterns that come from your childhood specifically that you can identify. Like you're saying, I can identify that in my childhood, mom or dad did this, that caused me to think in this way and then act in this way. And so I can see it's causing problems for me in my day-to-day life. What you're doing is you're identifying a pattern. And then you are cross-comparing those patterns which you've identified to information that you're gaining about mom, about grandma, about great grandma, about grandpa, right? And you like it's not going to be hard. It is crazy. It will be like once you look at those patterns, it will be like, "Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
they've got it also." So, that's how to go about doing it.
And then it sounds like, I guess, a big question. I'm going to put two questions together. Forgive me. One is, wounds can skip generations, so we get to look back. But also, you may not consciously see the wound, but maybe your sister or brother is wearing it.
Yep. I don't even know what to say about that because yes, it's definitely true. Yeah, that actually happened even in my own ancestral journey, for sure. It's like I started to notice patterns, ancestral patterns in my brother that were specifically from one line. And what has interested me, especially as I've continued to do more and more work with ancestral healing with people, is how it tends to be that a specific sibling will take on a lot of the patterns from one line, and then another sibling will take on a lot of the patterns from another. My brother took on a lot more of my mother's family than I did, and I took a lot more of my father's family. So, and of course, that's the intention of the soul streams of both him and me coming into this family and being like, I'm working on this. Oh, I'm working on that one, you know? So yeah, you're going to see based off of that intention that we could call it a soul or like a stream of consciousness has before coming into a family line. That intention determines a lot of what type of traumas you are going to adopt and take on. Some are unavoidable though. Some are literally not avoidable. It's something which it's not like an option to take that on. It's not just like pass that goes to the next person, but there are some that are not. You don't need to actually actively work on them.
I watched in my childhood again. My sister, in some ways, escaped relatively quote unquote unscathed until I went off to college, and then it was her turn, and it was her turn to be gifted with what she came here in order to heal. Can you tell me? And this is, see, I'm a geek about this stuff. So
Yep.
what I'm hearing is actually fun. I'm not
Okay.
hearing easy. I'm not hearing light. Maybe this is the athletic side of me, but I'm saying this discovery is the good stuff. This is how we came here to learn and to grow and to expand.
Oh, you and I would be problem if we walked into like a genealogy center. I think this is the most fun thing ever. And it just doesn't stop. Every time I go somewhere to
Yep.
discover something else, I discover something. And that thing that I discover is like, changes the whole game. It is like a never-ending Easter egg hunt where every time you find something, it's like it changes the narrative of self. It is incredible. And you never know where you're going to find stuff. It's not like that's what makes this kind of fun, but also challenging. It's not like somebody put things neatly in a box, and was like A, B, C, So it's like we may go on a trip to an ancestral land and then walk into a building and ask some random person about our family, and they're like, "Oh yeah, let me tell you stories." What? We lost all of that coming across the pond, right? Or
Yep.
then the next minute it's like you look online and there's this document and you're like, wait, that's the opposite of what my whole family said. What? You know? It's just is so cool because it's constantly unfolding and you just never want to stop looking when you're really getting into this. I'm not saying that everything you find out is fun. Some of it is so painful to the degree where it's like it's living history. So that history is in you. It's not like out there. So it's very different than just listening to a history course. When you're going down this ancestral wormhole and you get a piece of information that's particularly painful, like maybe it's a personal account of what it was like to live in the Pale of Settlement at a certain time that your grandfather was there or something, or great grandfather. It's like everything they're describing, it starts to just be like, it's like your whole body is reacting as if you are there because you were you were right. So it's not like I don't want people to walk into this feeling like, oh, everything's going to be fun, but everything is like, would you rather not have that information? Oh, hell no. I would rather know that that's the kind of stuff I'm working.
Let's go back to the settlement. And
Okay.
let's say that is your family lineage. And I'll throw in here just a little bit of science. You could take a mouse, they have done this, and you could put him in a cage or a maze or something and zap a mouse. He gets it hurts, but he's okay. And then never do anything other than loving up that mouse for 1 generation, 2 generations, 3 generations, 12 generations, and then take grandpup mouse and throw him in that same maze, and they will freeze cold right before hitting the zapper. And you go,
Yeah.
where is that information? It's in them. It's in their blood.
Yeah, I mean, this is scary. I mean, to a degree, this is a little bit scary for us, but it makes sense in terms of evolutionary biology, even. The fact that if you've got a particular threat to the survival or well-being of something, that better have some way to make it beyond them to the other person. So memory is something that is inherited. And of course, this is where I love the juice of this. I call this an indirect ancestral trauma, meaning it's something that has been experienced by somebody in a previous generation, and yet that pattern wasn't necessarily something that directly came to you through whatever person in that line you had an interaction with. You see a lot of this when you are looking at adoption stories, because there's no possible way that person could have any interaction with somebody so as to have an experience with that scary thing, and yet it's still in their body. And ancestral trauma can get real juicy this way.
So you find out something, you get this piece of information, you get this nugget. What do we do with this information? We're going, okay, this is the good stuff. Why does it feel so icky? What do I do with this?
So we're talking about the icky information, right?
Yes.
We figure out what the pattern change would be, and we bring it about ourselves. And I want people to make it that broad, because if you understand it in that broad way, you can then apply it to anything, right? So, and it could be a lot of things, right? The pattern change could be a lot of things. We can get really creative with this. So let's say that, with me in my ancestral lineage, right?
Yep.
Let's say that I identified the fact that nobody in the family had a very strong attachment to each other.
Yep.
That the family had this attitude of, it's all about what you're going to go do.
Yep.
In a lot of real successful families that are entrepreneurial, and that especially that jump to the pond, meaning that somewhere back there was an ancestor who was like, I'm never going to see you guys again. New life, when you've got that type of a chain running through the family, and you can see the kind of damage that does to the children, feeling not really a part of something, not really held, there's no grip, then the pattern change for that would be something that feels like grip, something that feels like closeness, something that feels like belonging that doesn't go away. So my attitude towards myself and healing would be to then create that and find that for myself. So I'll give you an example. I realized very early on that I wasn't going to find a lot of that in the white race. When you're talking ancestral trauma, by the way, we need to be able to get racial and religious and all the things we aren't supposed to talk about, because that's where we're looking at, right? So I realized that it was going to be more difficult to find these types of patterns in the white race, especially in America, because so much of white America was groups of people, like individual people, I should say, that jumped the pond, meaning they got away from their entire family and made it through this pattern of disconnection. And so I was like, maybe one of the best ways that I could go about experiencing this missing thing in my family for myself, and therefore being able to pass that kind of feeling of grip on to my son, would be to go into more like ethnic families, maybe Hispanic families, maybe Black families, and watch the way that they interact with each other, watch their attitudes, and actually try it on for myself. And so I struck up friendships with people who were not white, and got exactly what I wanted. This is something that I'm very interested in, where this goes in the future, because it kind of spells this really beautiful picture that in these cultures, everybody has a medicine. So we're talking about the global again. It's like, if each culture has a really beautiful medicine to share with the world, we should be kind of cross-culturing in order to get that medicine, And I definitely felt like that was the case. For me specifically, a lot of it was the Mexican culture. They held a lot of the antidotes to what was going on within my like uber white, like, A-lister family. And it was like so profoundly healing, not only to experience it, receiving it from them, watching them with each other, but also then to know what that missing resource was to then offer to my son. It's no longer the message, oh, by the way, when you're 18, you're out. Like, go have fun with yourself and you better do something awesome. The energy is like, I'm here no matter what. Yes, it's expected that you're going to be here. I'm going to support you in what you want to do, but this is you. This is your place. This will always be your place. And, I'm watching that pattern, that negative pattern, just be like, totally flipped,
My wife and I have a very open-minded, open-hearted relationship. We can talk about anything. However, while we're talking right now, I'm all of a sudden going back to her grandparents who escaped from communist China. Okay. And seeing how they fled, left everything behind, got to Taiwan, and then their kids, which is my wife's mom and dad, in a sense, fled Taiwan and came to the States. And then I can see the walls in God, her dad has been such a refugee mentality. I will take care of everything. I will protect everyone. I will do every single thing possible. And her mom has an emotional disassociation. These are beautiful, amazing people, but now I'm able to see these wounds. What do we do when we see this in our loved ones? or we see this in their lineage, and we go, well, I want to help them, and we know how that goes if it's uninvited help. But in this case, we've got a little one, and I'm going, wow, I see my wife is so amazing, and yet this is still in her ancestral lineage.
So we have two options. One option is to go the conscious way, which is that we make the person aware of the negative pattern, and then by virtue of doing that, we suggest things for them to do. The other is that we just come in with an antidote. So if I'm going to go, like, let's say that I do this with my parents, right? I could make them both aware, hey, dad, you got to know this. Like, literally nobody in your family is connected to anyone else. Like, do you realize that this level of disconnection is not freaking normal? Right? I could wake him up to that fact and then be like, we need to do this different, and then try to push him towards a relationship he doesn't know how to create, right?
Yeah.
I could go down that road, and Lord knows if you've got a family that is like wanting to participate in multi-generational ancestral healing, just call me, because it's like my favorite thing in the world and my dream. But it rarely happens. What's more common is that we're really into it. Our parents really aren't into it, and neither is, other people in the family. And so what we're looking to do in that case is to just offer the antidote. So let's say that I've noticed this specific pattern within my dad's line.
Yeah.
Maybe I offer him more grip. Dad, I want to know what you're thinking. I want to know what you're feeling. I really want to understand you as a person, not something anybody in the family does, And so I start to offer him the missing need that he'd never got met.
I like it. I like it. So I'm going to go. One of the favorite people I've had on the show is Dr. Michael Lennox. He's an astrologer. And he talks about how, and he's not the only astrologer who talks about it, how and I'm not very good at astrology, so forgive me. We are having our return, like a Saturn return for the US right now, from the time of the Declaration of Independence. And you're already wincing, and, and I know you know where I'm going here. And the all men are created equal. How do we begin? Is it all just an inside job, or how do we take the wound of the human beingness of Americana, of a country that was founded on ancestral wounds? And how do we begin to heal that? Because it's coming all back up, and it's going to party this year to be healed.
Well, everybody's going to be called towards their participation in the macrocosm in different ways. So you could say that I'm not only doing an inside job, neither are you, by virtue of the fact that we're having this conversation, Ethan. Like, that's us in the public, essentially taking what is an inside job and externalizing that job. Some people will be called to do that in the public sphere. Some people will be called to do that in the education sphere. But I feel like all of it, yes, will stem from the inside. It's going to stem from us changing these sort of macrocosmic levels that we see out there, changing them in here, And yeah, there are going to be some serious themes this year, including that equality one, which is an absolute illusion. So until we understand that it's an illusion, we're not going to be able to fix what it is that we are needing to fix. Maybe I should do a whole video on that one. Oh no.
I would think so. I would absolutely. So is it a matter of just recognizing it and taking ownership that what we believe isn't quite what's really going on, even close to what's really going on? Is that the first step?
It's about questioning. We have to drastically and dramatically question things. And part of that is to face the pain which we are avoiding through the lack of questioning. Right now, what you've got is people who are fixed, totally fixed on this concept of like what's right and true and what's wrong. This is actually where this is exploited in election years, right? What politicians unfortunately exploit is people who are so locked in to one way of being that they won't let go of it. And so they're like, okay, well, that's a divisive thing. All I need to do to get my votes is to just decide where I stand in the divisive thing. And unfortunately, it divides us further. And so what the pressure is like on us that we have this year, and also the responsibility, is to see where we've got our teeth locked into things and therefore could very easily miss certain truths, and could very easily be manipulated and exploited by virtue of our attachment to certain things. This is obviously something that I'm very vocal about when it comes to election years, because usually if we've got something we have a lot of personal trigger around, whether it's, things like abortion, or whether it's things like free speech, all of us are impacted by these things to varying degrees. If we find a thing that we're personally impacted by, that's a subject where our teeth is dug in really, really tight, right? And we're already convinced of a certain way of being. Very easily, a politician can slide all these horrible things we would never say yes to into their campaign underneath this one thing we would say yes to. And then because that's all we seem to care about, we miss what's hiding underneath it, right? So what we need to do is we need to take that thing that we're like got so much personal heat about, and we need to be willing to go as deep into it as possible to resolve the pain that is underneath it, because we use our stance of rightness and wrongness as a smokescreen to hide pain. It is the pain we need to be looking at. It is the pain we need to be resolving. And by virtue of doing that, it actually we can pull our teeth out of it, so we are actually able to objectify, or not objectify, sorry, stand in an objective perspective more so,
Yes.
which we have to be able to do because, there's a lot of forces that are going to try this year to get us lost in the weeds. And I
And
can
to
tell
play
you
with
that
our
doing
wounds.
that deep internal work around our wounds, around these intense beliefs of ours, is really what is going to make it so that we can make the right decision and not be sucked into something by virtue of somebody controlling, honestly, our decision-making process and our actions based off of hitting those triggers intentionally.
So I'm going to try to make this as generic as possible. But
Okay.
let's say that you are for this person. Oh, no, 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 no. Let's say that you hope something bad happens to this person so that they don't get elected. I hope something bad happens. I hope something bad happens, which in a holographic universe is really a dangerous thing to do. Uh, However, how do we then recognize that and go, oh, this is something, this is the Easter egg. I need to lean into it. And what do we lean into at that point?
So, I mean, in a situation like what you're describing, you would want to go into, what am I afraid will happen if they don't die? That's how you find the wound. It's going towards whatever your fear is. So, but like that's not where the real good stuff is going to be this year. The real good stuff is going to be in something like this.
Please.
No matter what, they can't take my guns.
Yes.
Okay, so let's say you have this attitude and like you can feel yourself just getting heated.
Mhm.
So what you want to do is to dive straight into what happens if they do take my guns. If I lose my guns, what is that experience? You're diving into the emotion of that experience, right? You're feeling it through all aspects of your body. Now you're asking yourself, when did I first come to this? Because no baby is born saying, I hope they don't take my guns. When and how did I get to the point where I held this mentality? That's when you start to see like the personal element of it, right? And where you can start to see that window of opportunity to miss all kinds of information because all you're focused on is your reactivity to that one thing you experienced, right? If you go all the way through that pain and you actually create resolve with it, a lot of that's done mentally. Like I said, I mean, there are people that offer different processes. I've got one such process for that using completion process. We go back to that original event, that traumatic experience, and we create resolve to it on a mental level. There's different ways you do that. Like, let's say you're there with your child self. You you're afraid that somebody's going to, like, say, break in and steal all your stuff. Maybe it's you sitting on the floor listening to your dad be scared about something that's going to happen to him. And so it's actually not even necessarily in these gun-toting households. It's not even necessarily a personal experience, right?
A very weird moment here because
Okay.
I had a dream last night where something was going on outside of the house
Okay.
and I found myself loading up a shotgun. I have never fired a gun. I have no plans. I love everybody equally, but that's just not my game. And I've loaded up a shotgun and I'm laying on the ground next to Jessica in front of a screen window, kind of in like a patio deck with all these screens. And I'm waiting to see if people are going to come and raid us. And I've got a gun on the ready and I'm hearing guns. And you're like talking about this now.
Oh no. Okay, so let's say in a lot of these gun-toting households or even in racist households, a lot of when they go back to the original experiences, it's hearing other people talk about really scary things that have happened to them or might happen.
Yep.
So you can go back to, say, the child self that's sitting on the floor watching, say, dad talk about all these bad things that are happening, and back to that feeling of being so scared of what could happen to your family. And
Yeah.
let's say you basically meet the need. So that child at that moment may have needed somebody to help them through their emotional state. or may have needed somebody to take them to a safe space. So you are actually mentally visualizing the process of some resource, whether it's your adult self or whether it's a safe support figure, coming in and taking that child into that safe space or helping the child process through how the child's feeling. Because dad's not thinking at that moment, wait a minute, I'm scaring the crap out of my kids, right? So the kids are kind of sitting there going, I get to figure out what to deal with this, how to deal with this myself, and they can't because they can't actually regulate at a certain age. So once you're working yourself through that experience as a child and you're becoming aware of, a lot of the whys behind the intensity of this trigger, what'll happen is that intensity of the trigger dissipates. That alone helps us to disidentify. The second step is we try as much as we can to get into the perspective of the opposite. Super important during election years. Why? Because what we watch in these really divisive times is that we usually hold a truth the other side doesn't see, and they usually hold a truth that we don't see, right?
Can you
Like I'll give
repeat
you
that? Because I want people to anchor that in, please.
Okay, to anchor that in, when you're dealing with these intense sides, especially politically in a situation, usually whatever side we're identified with holds a truth the other side doesn't see, and the other side holds a truth that we don't see. And we have to accept that. And it's very difficult for us to accept that, but we can get ourselves into a whole boatload of trouble by not seeing that. Case in point, there's a reason why, the people who in Germany went for Hitler. There's a reason,
Yeah.
right? And it was a very divisive time in Germany, right? You've got some people in that country that are like, I don't want this at all. And some people are like, this is the best thing that ever happened to us, right?
And the
Now,
country had been crushed. The country
totally
had
crushed.
been crushed. They were left in a very, very difficult situation.
Exactly. So if you're getting basically both sides hold a specific truth, right? So, this like one of the specific truths that say the side that's like anti-Hitler side held is we're walking down a very dangerous road. The people who were like, yes, we need this change, did not see or recognize the road they were walking down because they did not listen to what the opposite side was saying. And we could go the opposite way. These guys are like, wait, we are actually in a position where if we continue the way that we've been going, and if there is no change, we're in a whole boatload of trouble. So we have to participate a lot more actively about how to actually change these situations which are speaking so loudly to those people that are supporting Hitler, for example. So I see this in a big way relative to the Republican and Democratic mindset in America right now. Because, a lot of the people who are more on the Republican side, I mean, there's a lot of issues. So I'm like seriously generalizing here, but, something that the Republican groups tend to be very tapped into is the understanding of how government control can lead to very, very scary experiences for citizens in terms of control and things like that. Right, they tend to be more in touch with what was happening back in England before most people jumped the boat, jumped on boats and came over to start a new life. It's because this horrible experience of totalitarian control, which they're terrified of. Right now, that terror of totalitarian control might just walk them straight into it. Ironically, but that's something that they see. Now, the Democratic side sees a lot of what's going to happen if you don't support the people who your country is standing on, the people who are at the lowest levels. They understand at a much deeper level, I think, these overall patterns that you keep seeing throughout history of the collapse of societies, which is very much dependent on the disparity of wealth. So it's like if we were able to just sit down and be like, wait, what is that side? I want to get into their perspective. I want to see what it is that is really motivating them, what they're really afraid of, the dangers that they're seeing, and I want to take it on, try it on. Not just continue to stand on this side. And when we start to do this type of work, we create an integration. And that is something that, if you want the real revolution, honestly, right now, the real revolution right now is integration. It's what people on this planet, what politicians most especially on this planet can do the exact opposite of what we have been doing with this polarization and can instead create powerful integration. But that powerful integration is completely dependent upon getting out of our own triggers enough that we can be objective, and it's dependent on understanding and curiosity.
It seems like another key word. So ironic, and I don't care if you are an NRA member or not an NRA member, but on the drive back here today for this, I got cut off by a beautiful black pickup truck. I used to own a beautiful black pickup truck, which had an NRA sticker on it, and he's just laying on the horn. And probably had like a bumper sticker. I'm locked and loaded and ready to play, and all I could do was send him love because something hurt him. And I think that's the key piece element is integration and empathy. We have to have empathy rather than saying, well, this person is a this or this person is a that. They're hurt. How do we bring that empathy to the table today?
Empathy is the byproduct of understanding someone's pain. So we have to understand what that pain is. Rather than, and that's very important because oftentimes when we see somebody as the villain, we are not connected to their pain. I mean, we could imagine it if we at our, at the very lowest, but I mean, the closer that we can get to discovering information to understand what their pain is, the better. If I was somebody who was really interested in this, I would be going on forums full of people like what you're describing, and I would be asking these types of very open pointed questions. Very different than what happens when you see a debate raging online. The questions that most people are asking when they're in that type of chat forum discussion are not actually wanting to know. They're rhetorical questions designed to trap the other person in their own stupidity. So what I'm doing is, like say I go on these forums, I'm trying to ask questions so that I can have a better understanding of what their motives are, what their understanding is, maybe where gaps in knowledge are, and all kinds of things. Not trying to show them that they're stupid.
Let's take it, and we'll go a couple more directions here for Jay. This is brilliant. Thank you so much, Teal. And this is the word that comes up with so many people, and I think it's misused. But ancestral karma.
Okay.
Oh, goody.
Yeah, look, I got so excited. So when we're talking about ancestral karma, all we're talking about is the law of cause and effect as it applies to, instead of just an individual, an entire family line. It's a big thing when it comes to ancestral healing. Yeah. It's a very important element. And it's really what happens when we take powerful ownership over our ancestral line and maybe what that ancestral line has done over the course of time. I got a personal example for this one. So my family on my father's side for several generations were whalers, like,
oh, wow,
empire level whalers, not like, oh, I'm just a little whaler getting paid. No, like I'm talking like owned the empire type whalers, right? So they were responsible for single-handedly fishing the waters dry on the east coast of America, right? And so there's a lot of obviously ancestral karma there, meaning there's a lot of cause and effect.
Do you know the town Gloucester, Massachusetts?
Yeah.
A huge whaling community. That is where my father's family comes from.
Oh, that'd be so interesting.
We have so many connections. At one point, my father's office ran the payroll for all the fishermen in town. So the connections. Okay, sorry, way off track, and yet very interesting. Keep going.
Oh, I love that. See, this is the kind of stuff you get. I love this. All right, so getting out of my excitement about that.
Yeah.
Okay, so
family, take two.
So take two is I understand, obviously, looking at that and seeing the amount of damage that was done, right? A family line doesn't only do good. Family line does damage, sometimes the whole demographics of people, sometimes to, animals, to natural resources, whatever it is. So let's say that, I see that, which I did. I recognize very clearly that, my family was very responsible for a lot of decimation that was happening amongst this animal population, a sacred animal population, nonetheless. So what it is that it's not like, oh, well, just because my grandparents did this, like now I'm screwed and I have to do this. That's not the right mentality to approach this with. Because no, you didn't lift your finger to the knife. But it's that, recognizing, sort of owning them as my family. To own my family that came before me, I have to own the negative parts too. I can't just be like, not that. No, that. No, we were people who did that. So looking at that it's not about really taking on the guilt. It's not the energy. It's the energy of wanting to create a pattern shift, a positive one, wanting to make it so that the stamp that my family line leaves in this world is not one of let's exploit and murder some of the most sacred animals on planet Earth. It's let's support and let's caretake and let's become almost stewards of the sacred animal instead. So I'm making a vote. What ancestral karmic clearing is making a vote for the sake of my family line. My previous ancestors voted that way. I'm like, you know what, guys, I'm taking us in a different direction. We're going to vote this way. So instead of being the ones that harm them, I'm the one that helps them. And there's lots of ways that could look. So clearing up ancestral karma is a little bit different than me just developing, clearing up an ancestral phobia, which would be more like getting over my intense fear of whales. That's a different than the ancestral karma thing. The karma thing is, how do I do the opposite of that? Instead of the pattern of being a detriment to them, how do I become a benefit to them? And that may look like something like, putting money and funds towards projects that essentially maintain the health of oceans. It could be, deliberately being the person who goes out and helps. Maybe I'm donating certain time for whale rescues. I mean, it could look like all kinds of things. What's important is that it's a pattern change from the cause and effect before. Instead of being the cause of some negative effect, I'm going to be the cause of some positive effect. And the reason why it's very hard for me to narrow it down to one thing is because it could be so many different positive things that you could do for one specific negative pattern that you've identified.
What's cool is, so I'm hearing my daughter, she's 22 months old. She'll be 23 next week. So she's just about there. 4 days. Ooh, I will not miss her birthday. She will be 23 months. But we have a whale rescue center, dolphin rescue center, and a turtle rescue center near here. And so she's always going dolphin and always going turtle, and it lights her up and it lights me up. And so the antidote may actually be the very thing that lights you up. Is you're actually drawn to the antidote and give yourself permission to play with the antidote.
Yes. Yeah, totally.
Love it. So I had a dream, was it about a year ago, this horrible war scene taking place in my head. And I was on the border and there are two peoples fighting each other. And I woke up the next morning and it was Russia and Ukraine at war. And since my heritage is Russian and Ukrainian Jew, that sort of tore at me. And then we had Israel and what's going on in the Gaza Strip tearing at me. What can you tell me? What are ancestral loyalties? Because that's what I'm getting at. And where do we go with this?
Okay, so an ancestral loyalty is where we maintain some sense of loyalty with the family through some specific action that we're still doing. And why it's really important to think about loyalties in terms of negative ancestral loyalty is because those are the ones that get us the most in trouble. So let's say, I'll give you some example of that. Let's say that I come from a line, like a family line that is very anti-wealthy people.
Yep.
Because maybe it's a line of people who were farmers and they identified the sort of top tier of society as being the ones that kept them down. And
Yep.
now all of a sudden, loyalty to the family means sticking on this laurel of we're not going to become one of those people. We're not going to be like that, So maybe I've got a pattern within me, or in my dad does, and his father before him, of continuously shortcutting our own successes so that we can maintain that sense of loyalty to the family. That's an example of negative ancestral loyalty. Another one is, honestly, I watch a lot of it. Not that there isn't a lot of anti-Jewish sentiment happening in the world right now, because there is, but I see a lot of this cropping up in this issue with the Palestine versus Israel thing, especially on both sides. But of course, here in the U.S., we see a lot more of the Israeli side, where the sort of ancestral loyalty can be my people are a specific ethnic group, and therefore my loyalty is to that group, and I'm not going to see anything about this group that is a problem because I've already identified us as the victims. And it's almost like that could be not even a picture of what's potentially going on, but we're maintaining a sense of ancestral loyalty based off of that mentality.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of patterns that we could be doing. Another one that I see that's really interesting to study, because it's very much more, it sort of sets in with that thing about the downloading rather than the in-person thing, is that you tend to see these repetitive death dates or birth dates within a family, and that actually often falls into this ancestral loyalty thing. Let's say you've got a prominent sort of patriarch in the family who dies on a certain day, and that creates enough of a trauma imprint that even in future generations, there's a propensity to engage with people who have some relationship to that date, and that's an ancestral loyalty. I got a good one, actually, my own, that I just recently realized, didn't know I had it, but I married 3 men all with the same birthday. I'm pretty sure I just won the record here in the world.
Oh my God.
And like, so obviously most of me was like, what is going on with me in this date? It was August 29th, right? And I started to go down this road of ancestral healing, having already been teaching all this stuff about, dates repeating and blah, 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 blah. And here I'm like, whoa, it's in my family too. Turns out that 7 of my family members died on that day.
Taking it from a holographic point of view and the information that's stored in those people coming through on that particular date, what does that then mean, big picture, to you? Because that's beyond fascinating.
I don't know yet, is the question. Like, this is the thing. When you're doing as much as I'm doing, and especially with, not just with the ancestral healing myself, but like this big career, it's almost like you're postmarking this to sort of go down later. But I'm telling you, that's somewhere I'm going. Somewhere I'm going to go, and with people who understand astrology and numerology and blah, I'm going to literally put this before them, and I'm going to say, "What do you see? What do you see?" I mean, maybe it's my life or my relationship with this person ended this day, and I'm like, no, it didn't. No, it didn't. And it's just like all on the subconscious level. No, it's going to continue. Who knows? I haven't even dived into it because it's been so recent that I've been getting back these death certificates and being like,
All right, so let's go from there to a few more light. Oh my God, I don't know how to call this word, light. Forgiveness.
Ancestral forgiveness is really about creating some kind of a resolve or a healing with especially some wrong that was done or some pain that was experienced, so as to let go of it. So you've no longer got that same, level of grippiness about it. You're no longer holding someone accountable to something that happened within the family line. Of course, that could look like all kinds of things because it's going to depend on what our specific ancestry was. My favorite example that I've ever seen of this ever was with a Native American man who started off, trying to talk about ancestral healing to bite off. Started off with the ancestral healing thing just being like, I hate white men. I hate the white man, because it's like obviously I don't need to tell that story. We all know. So going through the process of forgiveness, like you were recognizing a lot of the hatred around it, playing this game of getting into the perspective of the opposite, starting to, pull the teeth out of the victim, villain, hero sort of triangle. It was so beautiful to watch that forgiveness process because this man got to a place where he started to recognize that what the whites essentially were doing was a direct result of what was done to them. So he started to see this like trauma chain through the white race, started to see that actually the natives could have been an antidote to that. That did not happen ultimately. But he started, like, what was really beautiful is that in this process of like trying to work around all of his pain around that and trying to the point where he felt like he could let go of it, a big part of that was to try to understand why, like the real why behind that happening, right? And the real why behind, understanding that not even little white kids are told things, or sort of born, sorry, not little white kids are not born wanting to kill someone. Like this is like trying to understand this whole chain of things. And what he started to realize, because he forced himself, and as a part of this process, he forced himself to read accounts, historical accounts of natives attacking whites and things like that. And what started to happen is he started to this is what's created the forgiveness. He started to see that this is not a whites versus natives problem. This is a humans versus humans problem. Basically, you started to recognize that cruelty is a human behavior. And you see it whether you go to Africa or whether you go to Europe or whether you go to South America. And instead of being so, sort of locked in with just the story of what happened to his people, he was able to sort of more own the human race and the picture of cruelty within humanity and say, I don't want to keep holding on to my resistance to every single, race that did this to my people because we did it also. Instead, I would like to be the type of person who shows kindness and teaches kindness. Now, while we could fit that into the category of something like clearing ancestral karma, or whether we could, put it even into another category, right, of changing, basically creating ancestral healing through changing patterns. What was very powerful about this, and what really categorized it in this section of forgiveness, is that there was a letting go entirely of the grip around lack of forgiveness. There was no need in him for anybody to make amends anymore, because it was like, the amends that are going to be made is me and anybody that I touch is going to be on the side of what they called essentially the rainbow tribe, which is this concept, pouring one's energy into the concept that we are going to be one human family, regardless of our color one day, all the colors of the rainbow. So it was interesting because this path of forgiveness for his ancestral experience led him even deeper into the ancient legends and beliefs of his people, his own people. And in forgiveness, there's a letting go, right? There's a perspective change. There is empathy. And it's almost like you're no longer in the victim frequency.
Which is,
of course, something that I teach is very important, is you can't force forgiveness. In this course, this ancestral course that I put together, I'm walking people through the different steps that they can go through to reach ultimately a state of forgiveness. But a person can't just decide to forgive if they've got all that heat going on for in the trauma. You actually have to resolve the heat first. And forgiveness is a natural byproduct of that process. But obviously, setting out with the intention to get to that step of forgiveness is what brings us down that path we need to go towards healing.
Thank you. Since you were mentioning Indigenous Native American gentlemen, what are some of the other ways of ancestral healing, like ceremonies, for instance?
Oh, I love that. Yeah, ceremonies are awesome. Of course, we can do ceremonies around, ancestry without getting into like serious esoteric stuff. You've got people who create altars and things like that. You've got people who learn about.
Wait, pause. Ancestral altar. Tell me more.
Yeah, so like if you want to set up an ancestral altar, usually you just like pick an area in your house somewhere, and you're putting objects there or things to devote energy to them, or to remember them, or all of the above. So it's your place for ancestry. And then it's almost like you're walking through the day when you've got one of these altars, you're walking through the day with them in mind. And then let's say there are specific, anniversaries of dates or specific holidays. You may put more energy into that altar. Like maybe you're burning specific incense. The traditional Taoist thing where you've got like the incense sticks and you're doing this, like the ancestors are heavily a part of that whole ceremony. You can create your own. And obviously it's going to be different. What we do in terms of our ancestral ceremonies are going to be different based off of what ancestry we come from. Me knowing that I come from the Alpine Celts might do research to figure out what some Celtic ceremonies are, and I may do a Celtic ceremony that involves my ancestors in some way. We got to get really juicy with the cultures that we come from, I think, to make that really good.
Playing some Enya.
Oh God. Oh no. No.
All right. But that does bring up an interesting point. Genealogical tourism, and I think you go nuts for, in a beautiful way, drinking the water.
I love this because I didn't know before I really got into trying to teach people actually about ancestral healing that I realized that roots tourism, that's what they call it, is such a huge industry. But there are straight up organizations that exist solely for this. So you give them your ancestral information, lands, names, and they literally set it up. Let's say you fly across to Europe, for many of us, you found out that there were people that lived in this area of Ireland. You've got people who will set the whole thing up. Guess what? You're staying in the same town they lived in. If not that, you're staying in the house they owned. Oh, by the way, some of your family members are there still. We connected them. The people who are into roots tourism go crazy. They go crazy. And they're like, oh, by the way, here's some ancestral food. We talked to a food historian, and that food historian said this is exactly what they would have been eating. You get to try. It's so, oh man. Look, if I changed my career, I could get into that so fast.
Yeah.
So obviously you've got roots tourism, but you can do that yourself if you've got this information. If you've got the information of, I know that my great great grandfather came from Ireland. I can fly to Ireland. I can ask around once I get there about what names come from what places. I can get in a car, drive to the place. I can go to the church, into the parish, see if they've got any records on the name. And it's like another treasure hunt that happens there. And it's so profoundly powerful to step on the land of your ancestors. And more than that, to drink the water that they would have ingested, because water is the keeper of memory. So the ancestral waters has a way of waking up. Remember, we talked about the fact that we've got all of this downloaded into your DNA. Drinking the water is a powerful way of activating a lot of that stuff. So it's a very powerful reset, very powerful reset. And I would suggest everyone doing that. Of course, some people can't, but like this is the thing, you gotta be a little, it's hard for me because I feel like right now so many people just want things handed to them on a silver platter. And also we live in a very complicated time where it's like how many people honestly have enough time to do a lot of that. But if you get a really good thing often requires that we pour some energy into it. So even if we can't put ourselves on an airplane and fly back to our ancestral lands, maybe we could get creative about finding ways for, water that's in specific places to be sent to us. I mean,
Ooh.
It's kind of like the sky is the limit for the things that we might be able to do. And that's the mentality you've got to be in if you're going to go down the ancestral path.
And I love how it unlocks doors. It's keys to, you can go to the movie Matrix. It's 25-year anniversary, all these white doors. And you've got the guy who's got the keys, and the keys are your ancestry. And you can go and choose to open and unlock a door and see what's there for you. So, couple last things. Why don't we want to reject? And this is so much fun, Teal. This is so much fun. this is the candy interview. Why don't we want to reject our family line and our ancestry?
Because it's extremely dangerous. I understand that it's tempting, especially if you've come from a very painful experience with your family line, to reject your entire family line. What I need people to understand very, very deeply is that just because you may have had a painful experience with or may completely hate somebody who's just upwind of you in that family line, they are not a representation of everybody in that family line. Super important to understand that. You don't want to project, say, abusive dad onto every single member of your family lines, right? When you would decide to, okay, why am I saying this? I got to go back, because your belonging within that family and you being loved by that family is not only contingent upon the people who are just upwind of you in that line. You may have had, in fact, most of you do have, like a fourth or a fifth grandparent who would have adored you, who you would have belonged with so intensely. So even those of us that feel very divorced from belonging in our particular family line, do not discount your ancestors. When we are cutting ourselves off from a family line, this is one reason why you got to be very careful about changing last names and things like that. When we're cutting ourselves off in that way, we're literally trying to reject and deny and disown one of the most powerful things that we brought into us. And not only that, we're trying to sort of undo the decision we made by coming in. When we came into this time-space reality, right? And we said, I want into that family line. Part of that agreement, a big part of that agreement, was not to say, I'm going to come in, decide I hate you guys, and then bounce out and disown you. We decided that we were going to come in specifically so that we could become the progression of that entire family line.
Yeah.
Now that not only makes it so that what we do powerfully connects to them, but also the other way. So while you can't cut yourself off entirely, never can, whether you'd like to or not, the conscious decision to try to cut off that connection actually prevents that very powerful feeding of aptitudes and positive traits from that family line. So it's very important for people, especially that have children, because a lot of people think, well, I don't want my kid to have anything to do with these assholes, right? But then what you're doing essentially is you're cutting them off from their identity. You're cutting them off from that powerful train of like traits that are running through that line. So you're cutting yourself off from power. It's crazy to watch on a metaphysical level when people try to disown their families. It is crazy. It is literally like, it's like they're clipping a hose that is feeding them. But of course, they don't perceive that it's feeding them, because what's in the way is all of these, painful patterns that they had with that they experienced with the people in that line.
Well, there's the baby with the bathwater. In this case, you're throwing yourself out with the
Yes.
bathwater.
Thank you. Okay. All of what I said could just be redone with that. Yep. Yes. It's powerful self-rejection. And what's ironic about that is that so many people, when they say want to disown their family in that way, they see it as the opposite. They see it as, this is self-ownership. Interesting. Because on that higher level, it usually isn't.
So a couple last questions before we go there, though. Where can people go, Teal, to find your work, to find your programs, to find out everything you have to offer and find out more?
tealswan.com. So all you have to do is remember my name, Teal Swan. That's the place on my website where I've got all the things that I do, whether it's videos or products or events, amalgamated in one location. But if you don't want to go down the rabbit hole of that kind of stuff, I would suggest just going to YouTube, because I release new videos every single Saturday, and I've been doing that for 13 years now. So there's a lot of content that you can just go into. So if you go to YouTube and you have an issue in your life, something like relationships, you just type in Teal Swan relationships, and you can go down that rabbit hole.
I love it. So the rabbit hole, thank you. And that's tealswan.com or Teal Swan on YouTube. And we'll have the links down below as well. So before I ask you our last question, the prior question to that, going down the rabbit hole, is anything you would say about sports and healing?
Oh, really? Oh my gosh. New chapter.
I had to go there.
Sports gets you into your body. Sports makes it so that you have to challenge yourself to become more and to advance. So by coming into this life, right, we could compare healing to expansion. It's the same thing. Like if you're expanding your healing, right? To heal is really simply to change a pattern to something better, right? So sports is a place where we can see that process condensed in such an intense way. And it's one reason, actually, yesterday I was skiing and I said this to somebody. I was like on the ski hill with them and I was like, this is why I love this. Sometimes with these internal patterns that we change, it's like it can be kind of slow to see the byproduct of that change we make. With sports, it is an instant feedback system.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, the way you change one thought pattern, it changes the entire way your legs move. So I feel like for people, especially who are interested in personal growth, sports is this incredible little micro world in which to see this process of looking at what doesn't work, trying to create positive changes so that it does work, and then it being like the instant feedback reward type of dynamic. Also on top of that, like you cannot excel at sports. You can't without facing the aspects of yourself that aren't working very well for you. So it's like this instant self-optimization system. On top of that, it's super fun. On top of that, you've got positive competition. Now, in the spiritual world, so many people are like, competition is awful. Human beings need to get past competition. Do I agree that there are shadows within competition? Yeah. However, competition is something which inspires all of the beautiful things which you see on this world, everything. You will never be able to talk to an athlete who's achieved anything incredible and have them be like, oh, yeah, I did it all because of me. Most of them, if they look at their direct competitors, are like, that's the one. It's that guy who did that thing that made me freak out and have to get better. So it's like I see the sort of competition within sports as being something which ignites all of these very positive qualities within ourselves. Things like expansion, things like inspiration, things like camaraderie, things like, getting over crap patterns that you've got going that aren't even benefiting you in any aspect of life. So yeah, sports and healing, they go hand in hand.
Woohoo. I always say that. And my sport I was doing last year, which I made on the national team for, kind of a niche version of triathlons. My cousin was the national champion. And so I said, I imagine that we're coming to the finish line and we're sprinting head to head. And I am going to be loving him up and cheering him on with everything he got, which is going to have him go faster. And then that's going to have me go faster. And then I'm going to love him up and he's going to go faster. And because of it, this is the art and the creative process. I don't really care who wins. I'm going to obviously try everything I have. And I would love that. But he's my cousin and we are going to both be better for it, for that experience. Not, oh, you just go ahead.
No.
It's like if I see somebody on the trail, I'm going to chase you down. I'm going to chase you down with everything I got. And then I'm just going to love you up and we're just going to have fun. This is being in this physicality is to have fun with everything we've got. And the last note that I have on this is also with sport. There's this thing called instant karma.
Oh, yeah. Oh, God.
Instant. We'll leave it at that. So, Teal, this has been beautiful. This has been brilliant. Any last words you want to share with people today? We'll go with on ancestral healing and ancestral wounds and ancestral karma, the works.
I want people to understand that the story of you basically started so incredibly long ago. And I think one of the most beautiful aspects that can come out of this process, besides so much self-awareness
Yeah.
and so much ownership of these incredible, powers that run through your specific family lines, is you get in touch with just how special your own existence is. You start to get a feeling when you realize how many grandparents and great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents it took to create you. And not only that, how many instantaneous micro moments it took to create you, where like one of those moments, one missed train, one person making a different decision in terms of what college to go to, and you don't even exist. When you start to get this picture, you cannot feel insignificant. It's not possible. You start to see the beauty of how incredibly special every single being is, and how much universal energy and synchronization went into the existence of you. It puts you not only in touch with your own specialness, but also it's like, oh wow, for the universe to put that much energy, basically, and that much orchestration into me existing. I want to do something very powerful with my life. And for some of us, that may not look like, doing something on the world scale that you've been traditionally taught is a big thing in the world, right? But it may look like, what? Given that there's all this energy, coming into the existence of me, I want to make every moment matter. I don't want to be on my phone, say, flipping through, doom scrolling Instagram at the same time as drinking tea. I would like to taste the tea. So it has a way of putting people profoundly in life in a much, much deeper way, much more connected way than we ever were before.
Woohoo! Thank you so much, Teal. This has been beautiful. This has been amazing. These superlatives go on and on and on. We'll probably continue this conversation, but I get to wrap things up. So for everyone out there, this is Michael Sandler saying, be well, have fun, lean into your ancestral wounds with everything you've got. We're there with you. We support you. You can be courageous. You can do this. Begin today, and above and beyond all else, shine bright. Woohoo! How does it get any better than this? Thank you so much, Teal.
Thank you.
Oh, that was one of my all-time favorite interviews. How does it get any better than this? Ancestral wound, ancestral healings, so incredibly important. And as you saw in the show, the wounds will keep coming up and coming up. Not that there's anything wrong with you, not that you haven't been doing the work, but to help you to heal and to grow and expand and awaken at an even higher level. How does it get any better than this? Well, if you want to work on, forget about work. If you want to play with healing and growing and expanding and vibrating at the highest level you can, come join us with the School of Mystics 4 Wednesdays each month. How does it get any better than this? Simply click that link below and come join us for the School of Mystics. Or if you want to communicate with your loved ones on the other side of the veil, and literally your ancestors on the other side of the veil as well, come on over to automaticwriting.com. We have live classes each month. I know there's one coming up very shortly as well. That's automaticwriting.com. And if you simply want to raise your vibration up, 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 and way up on a daily basis, simply and for free, come to dailywoohoo.com. That's daily, WOOHOO.com. That's that link down below. And I will send you a newsletter, an attunement, the most amazing vibrational attunement and alignment you can get on a daily basis. You can feel my energy for this. That's at dailywoohoo.com. Here's a link to the next amazing show. That's funny to put it in front of the mic, but here is a link. Here's a link. There is a link to the next amazing show. Love you so, so much. Keep on shining bright. Woohoo! How does it get any better than this? Lots of love, everyone.
Shine bright.